So here they are. Jonathan's gone. He's beating these Philistines. The Philistines are scared. They're on the run. Israel is in pursuit. But in chapter 14, verse 24, it says, Now the men of Israel were hard pressed on that day, for Saul had put the people under an oath, saying, Cursed be the man who eats before evening, and before I have avenged myself on my enemies. So none of the people tasted food. How many of you ever gone on a long walk or run or hike? You know what you take with you? Snacks, right? I mean, if you're out there and you're hungry, what happens to your energy? Man, it's gone. It's depleted. You're tired. You can't do what you need to do. And over again in that chapter, it keeps saying, and the people were tired. How can you chase your enemies through the woods and you're trying to catch them and they're running on full stomachs? Maybe not as much full stomach as we had yesterday at the chili cook-off, but they're running. And here you are, you're starving, you're tired. And so it says the people were hard-pressed, and at the end of this, Jonathan doesn't even know that Saul has put the people under this oath. And so you know what he does? He sees some honey, and you know what he does? He eats it. And because of the oath he made, you know what Saul decides at the end when they find out that somebody's guilty? He wants to kill his son Jonathan. He's going to have him executed right there. He said, well, you didn't keep the... He didn't know, right, that Saul had made this foolish promise. So we look at this again. Look at chapter 14, verses 28 through 30. The people they're talking to Jonathan. They said, then one of the people responded and said, your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, Cursed be the man who eats food today. And the people are weary, they're tired. And Jonathan says, my father has troubled the land. See now that my eyes are brightened because I tasted a little of this honey. How much more if only the people had freely eaten today the spoils of their enemies which they found. For now the defeat among the Philistines was not great. Because of Saul's foolishness, the Philistines mostly get away. And you know what they're going to do the rest of Saul's reign? He's going to have fighting and war on every side. Partly because of this dumb decision. And so as you looked at the text so far, Saul only stops and does not execute his son because the people say, you can't do that. We just had a great victory. That's the guy that led us to victory. And Saul relents, and Jonathan survives. But so far at this point, Saul has offered sacrifices he wasn't meant to sacrifice. He's made a foolish vow, tried to execute his own son, and the result listed, if you look at 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 47 through 48, is that there's going to be warfare for the rest of his time. 14 verse 47 says, Now when Saul had taken control of the kingdom over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, the sons of Ammon, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines, and wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment. Guys, there was fighting. He won some, he lost some, but there's going to be fighting throughout his whole time. There's one more sin I want to cover this morning. You guys use the old baseball adage, right? The phrase we use all the time. 3 strikes and you're out. And Saul's got one more coming. And so I want to look at it in the text this morning. Turn to chapter 15. No, we're not going to read the whole thing. In chapter 15, just to summarize, Samuel reveals to Saul God's plan for them to strike Amalek. They're supposed to go make war on Amalek, kill the king, kill everyone there, kill the donkeys, the cattle, the camels, everything. Right? That's the command that God has given Saul. Lead the army, defeat them utterly. We're not keeping anything from it. Then look down at verse 9, chapter 15, verse 9. But Saul and the people spared Agag, that's the king, and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the more valuable animals, the lambs, and everything that was good, and were unwilling to destroy them completely. But everything despicable and weak, that they completely destroyed. In other words, they went in, and God said, I don't want you to keep any of this stuff, we're destroying it. And they went in and said, there's some nice stuff here. I'm going to take that for me. And they weren't willing to follow through with the command that God gave them. So again, if you go back a few chapters, right, as we've been talking about this, Samuel said, look, if you guys will listen to and obey the Lord, this kingdom will endure. How many times already, from the top down, are they failing to keep the direct commandment of the Lord? And so Saul doesn't obey, and if you look down at verse 10, the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I regret that I have made Saul king, because he's turned back from following me, and he has not carried out my commandments. And Samuel was furious and cried out to the Lord all night. Samuel got up early in the morning to meet Saul, and it was reported to Samuel, saying, Saul, come to Carmel, and behold, he is up at the monument for himself, or set up a monument for himself. Then turned and proceeded on down to Gilgal. So Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed are you of the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord. Can you guys imagine that? He's got the gall. Samuel comes. He knows, what did they call him earlier? Not just prophet, but the seer. That he knows, right? He's speaking with the Lord. The Lord's revealed this to him. But he comes up, and Saul's just like, yeah, man, it was a great victory. I kept the command of the Lord. We went down there, and we beat those guys. And then Samuel says in verse 14, What then is the bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the bellowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, oh yeah, they brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we've completely destroyed. In other words, he kind of blames it on the people a little bit. Right? Well, those people, I didn't bring the sheep back, but those people did. But don't worry, we're going to offer it to the Lord. Right? We're going to give this stuff to the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul in verse 16, Stop and let me inform you of what the Lord said to me last night. And Saul said to him, Speak. And Samuel said, Is it not true, though you were insignificant in your own eyes, that you became the head of the tribes of Israel? For the Lord anointed you as king over Israel. And then the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go and completely destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are eliminated. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Instead, you loudly rushed upon the spoils and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Then Samuel said to Saul, I did obey the voice of the Lord, for I went on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, right here, and have completely destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoils, the sheep and the oxen, the choices of the things designated for destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. In other words, he's still making excuses. Look what I did. We're going to give this stuff to the Lord. We just took the best stuff. And Samuel just said, no, you disobeyed the command. We're going to come back to some things in a minute, but look down at verse 22. This is where we're going to end it for today. Samuel said, Does the Lord have as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than a sacrifice, and to pay attention is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as reprehensible as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as reprehensible as a false religion and idolatry. Since you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Chapter 10, he's anointed. Chapter 11, he rises to power. End of chapter 15, God has rejected him as king. Why? He didn't obey. Now, I got some questions about this because I have some questions for all of us. How many of you obey 100% of the time? It's easy to give old Saul a hard time, isn't it? It's hard to look back at ourselves. It's hard. That's why when you get here in verse 22, he's like, the Lord didn't care about the offering. He didn't want this offering that Saul's bringing. He wanted obedience from his people. And then in verse 23, that's why it says rebellion is as bad as the sin of divination. In other words, if you are rebelling against the king and you're saying, I'm willfully not going to obey God and his commands, you might as well be practicing witchcraft. You might as well be worshiping along with the pagans around you. Do you guys know that when we sin, it is rebellion against the king? Rebellion. What's the punishment for treason in most countries? Or at least historically? It's been death, right? Treason was not treated well. Usually not even a very pleasant death, right? Then you look at this as we continue on the text, or in the rest of verse 23. It says, since you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Insubordination. What's insubordination? Not following the commands of the one who's given it to you. He says insubordination is the same as idolatry. You know who we worship usually when we disobey God's commands? It's ourselves, right? It's saying, I want what I want, and I will violate God's commands to do it. Now, we don't like to think in those terms. We like the pragmatics. Well, here's why I did it, God. Here's why I couldn't stop that. Here's why I did this. God just wanted me to be happy, you know? I just wanted to be happy. And we think in those terms. Guys, when we read the Old Testament, you know what we need? A better king. Here's what I mean by this. The New Testament tells us these things were written for us as an example. What do we learn? You know what I learned about the human heart? I'm just as bad.